College and has been writing and running ever since. Here's a fun fact. Joan Benoit, winner of the first Olympic marathon gold, once beat Steve in a 5-mile road race by about 2 minutes when she was over 50. How old were you?
I was 30-something, and yeah,
and she crushed you.
Yeah.
Love that.
I was actually proud.
Yeah, proud that you did it. That you finished. That's awesome. Again, don't panic if you didn't get a chance to sign in. Teachers or kids, the sign-in sheets will be here. Thank you again so much for coming and supporting the Ruettgers program, and most importantly, Mr. Lane. Ladies, gentlemen, gentle people, Mr. Lane.
Thank you to the Ruettgers family, but thanks to Dr. LaPrette for making the program work, because it's a really cool thing. And in my career here, I've seen some truly stupendous lectures, including a delightful one on Bruce Springsteen, I believe, many years ago. So anyway, good to see you guys. I'm going to do a sort of a shameless ploy for crowd participation. We're going to do a little trivia for leftover Halloween candy, Snickers bars. So start simple. How long's a marathon? 26.2 miles. And when was the first women's Olympic marathon? Brady? 1984, correct. Can I throw this? No, I won't throw it. You can get it later. At least one person in the audience actually attended that race. Was it you? No, I know who was it? Was it Miss McCabe? So probably somewhere in that blurry background is Miss McCabe. So I suspect. Final question to start us off. Why Snickers bars today? Yeah? Ooh, hot take. Did you say fifth most? I have no idea. Snickers was the official snack food at the 1984 Olympics, so nice. And also, in the United Kingdom, until 1990, the Snickers bar was known as the marathon bar. That's how it was marketed and labeled. So anyway, yeah. Feel free, because we have tons of Halloween candy at home. Feel free on your way out, grab some candy. So anyway, so this is the book, and people always ask, like, well, so why did you decide to write a book, and why this book? And I don't really have a good answer, except to say that sometimes, like, ideas get stuck in my head, and I don't really feel good. I feel edgy until I can get them out on paper, and so I can't tell you why this exactly got stuck in my head, this particular race, but I have really strong memories of this race. I was 13 years old in 1984. And my family we weren't like runners or anything like that, but we were huge sports fans. So if the Olympics were on TV, we were probably watching. And so I remember Sunday morning coming down, and the TV was on, and my family was watching the marathon. And this is the image that I remember. And this is about 2/3 of the way through the race. Okay, so what do we have here? We've got a freeway. This is Joan Benoit. She's winning the marathon by about 2 minutes at this point. And I like, it's been in my head since I was 13, just this picture of this tiny figure alone on the LA freeways. And so at some point, 2018, 2019, it just kept worming its way into my brain more and more. And so I started just writing down some notes. What do I remember about this race? What was it all about? And so that's kind of the genesis. Now, everything that you write down doesn't necessarily go anywhere. Like, you write a lot of crap, you write a lot of things that you just start and you're like, yeah, that's not very good. But the more and more I started looking at this event, this race, like, the more excited I got, for a bunch of reasons. but it starts with the women who are in the race. And so I want to introduce you to the main characters in the race, as it were. Starting with Joan Benoit. Attended Bowdoin College. I could throw another Snickers bar out. There's at least one person in the audience who attended Bowdoin. It's John Hickling back there. So she attended Bowdoin College. She's from Maine. So she sets the world record in 1983. Last year, she ran the London Marathon in 3 hours and 20 minutes, which is absurd. It's really annoying. Her claim to fame, in the 1980s, she was known as the toughest runner alive, right? Like, you talk to people and they run out of synonyms for tough when describing her. 17 days before the United States Olympic trials, she has knee surgery. Now, I don't know if you know how Olympic qualifying works, but in the United States, there's only one way to make the Olympic team, and that's you've got to finish in the top 3 at the Olympic trials, right? She went into 1984 as a world record holder. She's one of the best marathoners in the world, but if she doesn't finish top 3 at the trials, she's not going to the Olympics. And her knee just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and finally 17 days before she's got surgery. They roll her out of surgery. She's in post-op. She wakes up. She calls a friend to come pick her up so she can go for a run. And the doctor's like, no, you can't go running 2 hours after surgery. 3 days later, she's running. And 17 days later, she not only runs a marathon, but she wins the Olympic trials marathon. So she, Nike, this is how Nike markets her as a runner going into the Olympics. Be as tough as she is. So she's a world record holder. She's a great runner. She's not even the favorite going into the 1984 Olympics. That'd be this woman, Grete Waitz, born in Norway. She had participated in the Olympics in 72 and 76 in the 1500, which is about roughly the mile. She had broken the world record in the marathon 4 times going into the race. She had never lost a marathon she'd finished. And at all distances, she had beaten Joan Benoit 10 straight times. Joan Benoit had never beaten Grete Waitz going into the Olympic marathon. This picture up here, this top picture, she's training with, this is Rob Di Castella. He was the men's world record holder at the time. He's from Australia. He hated running with her. He hated running with her because she ran too fast. She ran twice a day. She'd be up at 5:30 in the morning, right out the door. She's running under 6 minutes per mile. And cross-country guys back there, I don't know if you know how that computes to what you do on your training runs, but Di Castella, he's like, she runs too fast to me in practice. So there actually was a rotation of guys around her. 2 national record holders from Norway, Rob Di Castella, her husband, Jack Weitz, and one of her brothers all kind of took turns doing training runs with her because nobody wanted to run with her every day. It was just too hard. So she goes into the Olympics as probably the most feared runner. Nobody actually in the Olympics had ever beaten Weitz. So she's the favorite going in. And so Benoit and Weitz is like this heavyweight matchup between 2 of the greatest runners in history. But they're not alone, okay? Ingrid Christensen, also from Norway. She runs the second fastest marathon time in history going into the Olympics. She's the first woman to break 15 minutes in the 5K. And she does that the summer before the Olympics. For those of you who don't do math, that's 4 minutes and 50 seconds per mile for a little over 3 miles. And she actually beats Grete Waitz twice on the track at shorter distances than the marathon. Rosa Mota, the far side from Portugal, European champion in 1982. She's going to win the gold medal in 1988. She becomes the only person ever to hold the 3 major marathon titles at the same time. Ingrid Christensen becomes the only person ever to hold the world record at the 3 big distance races at the same time. She does that in 1985. So so I'm putting this story together, and I realize there has never in history been an Olympic marathon with this kind of talent in only one race. Why are they all in the same race? Because they don't have any other options, right? There's not a 5,000 meters for women until 1992, I believe. If there'd been a 5,000 meters early on, probably Ingrid would have run that. So they're all forced, well, not forced, but they all end up in the marathon together. This is collectively what they did over the decade of the 1980s. They dropped the marathon world record over 13 minutes. Every major global championship in the 1980s, they win. They only race each other once in history, all four of them, and that's the 1984 Olympic Marathon. And so it's this really stunning race. And the other thing I'm struck by as I'm looking at this is I'm thinking, if they'd been born 5, 10 years earlier, we never would have had this race, right? These four are, if you follow running, they're legends. They're considered some of the very best runners in history. They don't have that opportunity unless there's an Olympic marathon. So if they had been born in the 40s instead of the 50s, they're past their prime by the time 1984 comes along. If there's no Olympic marathon until, say, 1988 or 1992, they're past their prime and they miss their window. So it's a glorious fact of timing that we get them all in the same race at the same time. So that's the race, and in the book I call it the greatest marathon in Olympic history, and I believe that's true. No other race, men's or women's, has ever had this collection of talent in a single race. So starts to seem like a cool book, but then I'm asking myself, well, why did it take till 1984 for there to be an Olympic marathon for women? Right? First Olympics are 1896. Right? Why does it take almost 90 years to get a women's marathon? So I start researching a little bit of history. This is a photo from the first Olympics at which women are allowed to participate in track and field. This is 1928. This is the longest race women get at the 1928 Olympics. This is the 800 meters. We could ask ourselves, all right, why does it take till 1928 for women to be able to participate in track and field in the Olympics? Starts with this guy. He founds the Olympics in 1896, modern Olympics, and he has this mantra, all sports for all people, and he says this all the time. He also says this, at the Olympic Games, women's role should be above all to crown the victors. So, all sports for all people, except women. Seems to be his mantra. So he doesn't want women in the Olympics at all. And here's the early history of the Olympics, okay, and the sports they participate in. What do those sports all have in common? They're rich kid sports. These are the aristocratic sports. These are sports for women of leisure. Those kind of things are acceptable. Running is not, okay? And so above all, he wants running to be kept out of the Olympics. So how does running finally get in the Olympics? This woman. Her name is Alice Milliat. She's a French athletics official. Twice in the 1920s, she writes to Pierre Coubertin and asks that he include women's athletics in the Olympics. Twice he ignores her. So she starts her own Olympics. Right? 1922, the first Women's Olympic Games. 11 events, 5 nations, 77 athletes, 30,000 spectators. Second Women's Olympic Games, right? The games are opened by Swedish royalty. 60,000 spectators attend. 9 nations are there. This photo, I love this photo. This is Kinoe Hitomi. She's from Japan. Remember that name. Here she is breaking the women's world record in the long jump, 18 feet. But look at the stands behind her. The stands are packed, right? And so Alice Milliat's women's games have caught fire. There's something here that's really good. okay? And the Olympics can't stand that, all right? The real goal of the Olympics, right, promoting sport and all that crap, their real goal is to make sure that they are the only international sporting festival that matters, right? They won't countenance any rivals. And she's created a rivalry, okay? So the International Olympic Committee realizes the only way to eliminate the rival and to control women's athletics is to bring the Women's World Games into the Olympics, all right? So what happens? In 1928 for the Olympics, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, agrees to bring women's track and field into the Games, just as she had requested in the 1920s, all right? Here's that first race. Here's the results of the women's 800. So again, this is the longest race they're allowed. The winner, Lena Radke from Germany, Kinue Hitomi, world record holder in the long jump, silver medal. There was no long jump for women at the 1928 Games. And Inga Gensel from Sweden, bronze medal. Note their times. I don't know if they'll mean anything to you, but here's the key thing. All three of the women in this race smashed the old world record for the 800 meters. All right, opportunity equals increased performance all the time. Okay, so this is one of the most amazing races from the Games. Right, this should have opened the door to greater women's participation. This should have said to the world, women can run distance well. They deserve a full slate of events in the Olympics. That's not what happens. All right. Here's how the newspapers reported that race. This is the Times of London. You can read it, right? There's the Chicago Tribune. Harper's. Right? Now you may have noted, right? They can't even figure out how many people were in the race, right? Some say 9, some say 8, some say 11. Different numbers are dropping out. Different numbers. It's like they wrote the articles before the race happened. It's like they already knew the narrative before the race happened. So what should have opened the doors to greater women's participation, instead, Pierre de Coubertin seizes on that and says, this is proof that women don't belong. And so after 1928, women's track and field and all women's events are very nearly eliminated from the Olympics. A compromise is reached in which women's events will be reduced, limited. The longest event for women will be 200 meters, and it will stay that way until 1960. All right? So it should have been a watershed toward greater participation. Instead, there's a backlash and opportunity is reduced. And so this is part of the reason, this kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is part of the reason it takes so long to get the marathon into the Olympics in the first place. But this gets me thinking, who cares? It's a foot race. Women were doing things of much greater consequence than running foot races by 1920s, right? They weren't always welcomed in huge numbers, and there were severe limits, obviously, on what they could do. But women had flown combat missions in World War I. They had been doctors since the Middle Ages. First woman to serve in the United States Senate, 1922. There were at least two women served as governors in Wyoming and Texas in the 1920s. This woman, Mary Edwards Walker, was a combat surgeon during the Civil War, right? So women are doing things of consequence. Why do we care if they run an 800-meter race or a mile race or any of that? That struck me as incongruous, perhaps, right? And so, the question becomes, why then is sports such a big deal, all right? And the answer to that I think you have to look back to what's happening overall in Europe and the United States. And what you're seeing over the course of the 1800s especially are the effects of the Industrial Revolution, the effects of urbanization, and small businesses are largely disappearing, small farms are disappearing, men are losing a sense of independence, a sense that they can control their own destiny. Cities are growing. They're growing really big. Cities are crowded, dense, diseased, right? So there's this feeling overall that not only have men lost a little bit of control over their destiny, but they've grown weaker, right? And so at the same time, there's this feeling that women are growing stronger, okay? So the same time that industrialization is sort of making men feel like they've lost control of their destiny, women seem to be making inroads into things that men previously thought of as their own domains, all right? Suffrage movement, women gain the right to vote in many places. In schools, girls seem to be succeeding at a higher rate than boys. In the workplace, women seem to be invading. Right? So for men, there's this fear that they're losing out, right? Now, what's the reality? Women are making some gains, but let's be real, right? The percentage of women in the labor force has barely grown. Women in professions, yeah, it's growing, okay? But here's the reality for women. 1870, top 3 occupations. 1920, top 3 occupations. Not much has changed, right? So whatever the perception that men have about their life, the reality is a little bit different, okay? But that perception creates kind of a mood, a feeling, okay? And so this is a wonderful article from the New York Times about how men are made too effeminate by the fact that there aren't enough male teachers, right? It's a distinct discrimination against boys. This particular writer says that boys are living under a petticoat regime in the school, in the church, and even the home. All right? So there's this feeling that there's no place for boys to be boys and men to be men anymore. Right? And as I'm thinking, I'm researching this. This is kind of interesting. There's a sense that we've grown soft. Right? There's this sense that the generation is womanized. The masculine tone is passing out of the world. It is a feminine, nervous, hysterical, chattering age. Now, this isn't reality, but the perception is there. Okay? And it did strike me that there are some parallels today, right? You read a lot about the crisis of men, all this stuff. I don't know what that means. This sounds kind of interesting. What's that? Yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was kind of interesting anyway that this is still out here, or this is out here again maybe. So anyway, to go back to the 1900s, right? The question is, how do we fix this? How do we make sure that men and boys are okay? Manliness. We must reintroduce manliness to the world. It will be the antidote to the poison of effeminacy. All right? And how are we going to do that? Sports, right? Women may take over politics. They may take over the workplace. They may do better at school, but we're going to have sports, right? So rugby, as it happens, is one of the first of the new sports in the 1820s at, oddly enough, the rugby school. In the United States, we see the first organized intercollegiate regatta in 1852. First baseball, Ethan Halbensell, 1869. Do you know who won? Do you know who won? You were there, yeah. Do you know who won? Do you remember? Alas, Ruettgers, 6-4. 1859, Williams versus Amherst, first intercollegiate baseball game. Jerry Mead, Melissa Carr, do you know who won?
We're hoping Amherst.
What's that? Alas, Amherst won the first ever intercollegiate baseball game, 73-32. Yeah, apparently the game was just first team to 65, and then Amherst kept piling it on. Not only that, what's really cool about this is that, okay, there's a baseball game and then a chess tournament after the baseball game. Guess who won the chess tournament? Fucking Amherst won the chess tournament too. So alas, dark day for Williams. But I mean, that's kind of important because there's this idea that sound mind, sound body, these things work together. But so there's this idea that sports will be the kind of reconstitution and the rebuilding of what it means to be a man. And not only that, at the same time, outside of schools, we start to see this rekindling of some kind of ancient Greek mythical games throughout Europe. Okay, and so into this movement comes Pierre de Coubertin, and he calls these Olympics a spiritual movement, and what he means by that really is it's like a sanctification of masculine virtue, right? And masculine virtue is going to be the things we associate with sports, like strength, fortitude, sacrifice, endurance, and these are solely male virtues, right? They have to be because men feel they've lost out everywhere else. Okay, so sports is going to be the one sort of citadel, the hill that masculinity can die on, that they must defend against women at all costs. So it's bigger than sports. It's about what makes a man a man. Okay, and how do you make sure that you keep women out of sport? Well, modern medicine helped. Okay, there was this theory about So if girls spent too much energy on sports, they would have no energy left to give birth or be mothers. There was this theory that if women exercised too hard, their uteruses would fall out. All of this stuff is out there that not only are sports about male virtues, they're really bad for women. Now, there was actual science, right? This team of researchers in Germany compiled studies on over 10,000 women. Results. Competitive athletics had no ill effect at all. No indications that the effects of sport on the female body are any different from the effects on the male body. Right? So we have scientific evidence that sports is good for women. Why was that scientific evidence ignored? Well, the researchers who did the study were women, and obviously then biased, right? So, yeah, their uteruses got in the way. I don't know, but so even in the face of evidence, right, there's this idea that sports must be bad for women. And there was a survey done of physical educators in the United States, and this actually is a quote from a woman who taught physical education, and she says it plainly, like, we don't stress the health risks, not because it is important, but because we don't actually know what they are. So we know it's bad for you, but we don't know why. Just, I don't know, trust us. So the combination of kind of an effort to uplift men and keep women out set up this sort of cultural belief that women couldn't run distance, right? Women weren't fit for endurance sports. Silliness, of course. And maybe that would have prevailed had it not been for women like Alice Milliot, who in the 1920s fought at least to get women into the Olympics in some fashion. So she got the foot in the door, and that's a wonderful thing. All right? And this is some of my favorite stuff that I got to research, like all about medical research from the 1900s and all the rest. I ended up cutting almost all of that from the book. Reason being, my my editors thought there were probably like 4 or 5 people in the world who thought that would be really interesting. And if you say you're writing a book about the 1984 Olympic marathon, you've got to write about the 1984 Olympic marathon. That's my way of saying thank you for indulging me a little bit. So it didn't go all the way to waste. Anyway, let's fast forward a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about the idea of good troublemakers, okay, in the world. Alice Milliat, certainly one. Do you know the origin of the phrase, like, good troublemakers? Get into good trouble? Where does that come from? Who's that come from? Yeah?
Is it John Lewis?
Exactly, it's John Lewis. You guys know who John Lewis is? One of the most important leaders of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. He then served 17 terms in Congress in the state of Georgia. And oddly enough, he once spoke at Concord Carlisle High School. You remember that? Yeah. One of our social studies colleagues that, I don't know, you guys might actually know him, Mr. Zellner. He taught here for 30-something years. He made it happen. He brought John Lewis here to speak. Anyway, Mr. Zellner still works as a substitute in the building sometimes. So if you see him, you should ask him about this, right? Ask him about bringing John Lewis to CCHS, because it's pretty incredible stuff. So anyway, so the book, my book actually begins in 1966, okay? So forget everything you just heard. And it begins with this woman. This is Bobby Gibb. In 1964, Bobby Gibb sees the Boston Marathon with her father. She's like blown away. She's like, this, I need to do this. She can't get the marathon out of her head. 1966, she writes to the Boston Athletic Association requesting an application, an entry for the Boston Marathon. She gets a note back. Women aren't allowed to run the Boston Marathon. Furthermore, women can't run 26 miles, and so we can't take on the liability of having you in our race. She's furious. And she's furious partly because she typically runs like 40 miles on her long run, like on the weekend. So she can run 26 miles. So she's maybe like the first Boston Marathon bandit. She hides in the bushes at the start in 1966. The race starts, she jumps out, she runs. The other runners are supportive, like, hey, this is awesome. Come run with us. Be part of the crowd. The Boston Record American, what is now the Boston Herald, this is a headline the next day. Hub Bride, first gal to run marathon. And number one, I love that paper. Number two, this image, okay? So she gets home after running the marathon. Her house is swarmed by the press. Right? There's reporters, photographers. They're fascinated. They're amazed. They're interrogating her parents. Like, did you know that she was going to do this? Did you allow her to run a marathon? Are you okay? And they're like, she's 22. She can do what she wants. They had her pose. This is like one of my favorite photos. They had her pose in a red polka dot dress, making fudge with one of her friends. Right. So she can be a marathoner, but she's also got to be a bride, and she's got to be like a traditional housewife. She's got to make fudge and stuff. So yeah, she's a gal. I don't know. So, but what this does is it starts a phenomenon. It launches a women's running movement. People call Bobby Gibb out of the blue, just to say, hey, I ran around the block for the first time since I was a kid. What do I do now? And she's like, I don't know. Keep going? I don't know. So she launches a running movement. And by the 1970s, running generally has caught fire, but women's running especially. And I want to take you through some this should be a trivia question. Who are Farah and Lee? You know. Okay. Probably, I don't know, probably considered the sexiest people alive in 1977. Farrah Fawcett, Lee Majors, and yeah, People magazine. They're the jogging craze. And And so I'll just point this out and then we'll move on, that in the 1920s, if you ran, you risked becoming too mannish or too masculine. In the 1920s, running was for the working class poor. They did that. The games of leisure for women were swimming and tennis and things like that. By the 1970s, that's changed. Running is an upper middle class pursuit, okay? And because it's an upper middle class pursuit, it's more acceptable. And it's fashionable even, okay? And because it's an upper middle class pursuit, because it's fashionable, there's money to be made. This is an ad from what was a really big cosmetics maker, Bonnie Bell. Come outdoors with us. We got a couple women running. Note they're ahead of the men. And Bonnie Bell sponsored a bunch of road races around the country in the 1970s. Avon Cosmetics. Avon sponsored a marathon series in the 1970s and 80s. Shiseido in Japan launched its running group in 1979. And they sponsored a massive marathon in Japan in 1979. Point being here is that what started with Bobby Gibb becomes an international phenomenon, and it becomes an international phenomenon with money behind it. All right? Running shoe companies, I just like the name of the shoe, the Nike Liberator for women. So running shoe companies are in on the act, right? And marathoning for women is becoming big business, right? And remember what I said about the International Olympic Committee and their goal, right? The fact that marathoning for women is becoming a big business is a little bit scary to the IOC, okay? And here's what's happened. It is a little bit like 1928, okay? Avon has an international women's marathon, a kind of a world championship. Shiseido has an international marathon, this kind of a world championship. In 1980, Nike offers to sponsor a women's distance kind of festival at any alternative Olympic style festival, all right? The International Olympic Committee is scared. They're scared that they're going to lose control of women's marathoning. They're scared women's marathoning will become like, I don't know, like golf or tennis, where even if it's in the Olympics, the big events are not, right? Like tennis, you know, it's in the Olympics, but I think most tennis players would rather win the US Open or Wimbledon than the Olympics, right? Or even like soccer, right? Soccer's in the Olympics, but the World Cup is the thing. The IOC is afraid women's marathoning is going to go that route, right? And they're afraid if women's marathoning goes that route, because it's so glamorous, because it's so popular, men's marathoning will go that route. And if that happens, right, it's possible that the Olympics will lose control over the entire distance running field. And so in 1981, they vote to include the women's marathon in the 1984 Olympics. So that's how we got there, right? And why not capitalize on it, right? And so Nike runs these ads and about the Olympics will never be the same, okay? Because yes, women are going to run the marathon. From 1981, when the marathon is approved for the Olympics, to 1984, you have those four women, Joni Benoit, Greta Weitz, Rosa Mota, Ingrid Christensen, all kind of circling each other, all kind of watching each other, knowing how they're racing and kind of marking how they run. On April 16th, 1983, Greta Weitz breaks the world record for the marathon. She goes home with her husband. They make a bet on how much faster Joan Benoit's going to run in the marathon the very next day. All right, and so Greta Weitz sets the record at 2:24 on April 16th, 1983. Joan Benoit runs 2:22 on April 17th, 1983. And they're kind of avoiding each other in terms of big marathons, but they're getting ready for the day. Now, building up to the Olympic marathon, the week of, I think it's important to point out, I'm not sure Grete Waitz or Joan Benoit slept. They both got so nervous before big races. Joan Benoit says like she could barely function, right? She would forget her car keys. She would forget where, how to get home even. Grete Waitz, her stomach would get tied in a knot. She could barely eat. And one year, it wasn't the Olympics, but Waitz is on a bus, like the elite athlete bus, out to the starting line for the New York City Marathon. And she's like shaking, and she says, God, I hope the bus breaks down and I don't have to race. They got so keyed up for this race. And so the morning the race dawns, neither Benoit nor Waitz has slept. Neither one of them has eaten. They're both like in their own way, just dealing with the incredible pressure of this moment. And then finally it's race day. Yes. Nike has changed a lot. At this time, Nike it liked being the rebels, right? They went out of their way to antagonize the establishment in the sporting world. Now they are the establishment, so they do a little less of that. So I'll touch briefly on the race. This is 14 minutes into the race. And Benoit just starts slowly easing away from everybody else. They're not running super fast yet. They're like marathons. A lot of times it's kind of like you spend the first half kind of easing into things, testing each other, and so they're still running pretty slowly. Everybody's well within their comfort zone, but she just starts easing away. It's just almost like naturally she wants to run a little faster, and she does. She looks back once. And then she looks back again. And then literally, ABC was on commercial, I think, when this happened. But I got to see the raw footage. I would show it to you, but I was allowed to borrow it for 2 weeks, but then I had to give it back. So I don't have it anymore. But literally for like 2 strides, she turns around like this. Like she can't believe this is happening. This is the biggest race in marathoning history, and they're letting her go. Right? She can't believe it. Here's Grete Waitz right here. Everybody else in the race, when Benoit does this, starts looking at Grete. They're like, is Grete going to let her go? And everybody else in the race is like, if Greta's staying here, I'm staying here. Everybody else in the race keys off of Grete Waitz because Waitz is the one that scares them the most. Maybe they should have been more afraid of Benoit. They felt that maybe Benoit, because she'd had knee surgery, wasn't at full strength. They felt maybe she's going to die, but mostly they're just deferring to Waitz. And so the entire race then is Benoit extending the lead, Waitz fading. Waitz went into the race with a plan. At 30 kilometers, which is about 18 miles, she was going to hammer, and she was going to catch anybody who was out front. And she did exactly that. But she couldn't catch Benoit. Waitz thought Benoit was going to die. Didn't happen. And Waitz took a lot of criticism for letting Benoit go here. And that's sort of the narrative that's developed. It's not quite fair to Waitz for one reason. Joan Benoit on this day ran faster than Waitz ever ran in her life. And so even if Waitz had tried to go with Benoit, she's not beating her that day. So Benoit was just on another level on that day. But so here's the break. And so, think back to that image I showed you, right? By 2/3 of the way through the race, she's 2 minutes ahead, which for an elite marathon, that's over 1/3 of a mile. That's like almost 700 meters. She's out front. She ain't coming back. They're not catching her. And so she goes into the Olympic Stadium. Now, a couple things are cool that the crowd stays on their feet for Grete Waitz's finish, for Rosa Moda's finish. The crowd is basically standing, cheering them all in. So, first women's Olympic gold medal in the marathon in history. This is Gabby Anderson Scheiss of Switzerland. Now, right about here, one of the officials is yelling, "Do not touch the runner, do not touch the runner." If they touch her, she's disqualified. This guy comes right up to her. She runs away from him. She can't even keep a straight line, trying to wave to the crowd. This lap takes her about 7 minutes, but she ran, I think, around 2:40. The commentators are going bonkers right now. Marty LaCory is practically screaming at the officials to pull her off the track. Catherine Switzer, who ran Boston in 1967, is yelling at Marty LaCory saying, "This is the Olympics. She's earned the right to finish if she wants." I don't know what you would do if you're an official right here. But she's running away from them. She does not want them to touch her. Now, no, she got across the finish line and then they grabbed her. Kind of a terrifying moment. She says she was in agony for about 2 hours after that, and then she was fine. Next day, she's like, yeah, it was just a little dehydration. But the point of this, the reason I want to show that is this. Remember 1928? Like, we're making up stories about women collapsing, and that's a reason they can't run. She becomes a hero, right? She becomes more of a symbol of the Olympic values maybe than Joan Benoit. And she's celebrated as such for years and years. And she's kind of embarrassed by it. She's like, I would have rather finished top 10 in the Olympics and done this. But I think that kind of in a way shows maybe the evolution of perceptions of distance running anyway. The fact that despite the very real distress she's in, it's not taken as evidence that women can't do this, right? It's taken as evidence that there's probably nobody tougher in the Olympics than Gabby Anderson-Scheiss. So, but it is scary to watch, isn't it? It's a little disturbing. Anyway, that's all I got. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.